much, Eric. My name is Chris, and I'm a recovered alcoholic. My sober date is September 26, 2014. I'm a member of the All Lit Up Again group in Baldwin, New York. That's Western Nassau County. I have a sponsor out of Long Beach, California. I have a number of sponsees I get to work with. I practice 10, 11, 12. I'm the business chair at my home group. And I share that because I was told we have a threefold disease, threefold solution. Solution, service, having a service commitment. Unity, having a home group. Recovery, how it works, talks about here are the steps we took, which is suggested as a program of recovery. And it's important for me to know what alcoholism is because I've known some people that I'm very close to that thought they knew what Alcoholics Anonymous was, but died because they were misinformed or they misunderstood. One Thanksgiving, I was talking to my uncle, and I was a few years sober at the time, and he said to me, he's like, Chris, it seems like something's different about you. And he's one of our family alcoholics. And I told him, I'm sober, I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, and this program has changed my life. And he said, and he put his head down and he's like, he starts nodding his head. He's like, yeah, AA didn't work for me. And I said to him, well, what did you do? He said, I've been to a few meetings. I'm like, did you have a sponsor? No. Did you do the steps? No. Did you get involved and have a service commitment or a home group? No. And I encourage him to come. I encourage him to come with me, to take him with me, and introduce him to what AA really has to offer. Right? The book says half measures availed us nothing. Well, that was his experience because he passed away due to alcoholism. I'm grateful that I had the chance to tell him what Alcoholics Anonymous was and what it wasn't. Because I know I'm just like him. I could be where he's at if they didn't tell me what the solution was. They have a disease of the body, a disease of the mind, and the spirit that we share in the same peril, right? The powerful cement that binds us, the same problem and the same solution. And that the ability to experience this reprieve is available to me if I would have it, if I do what you did through participating in all three legacies. Because the truth of the matter is that I am the real alcoholic. When I talk about recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, that's what I mean. I remember hearing people saying that they were recovered, and I always thought it was pompous and arrogant. So somebody showed me in the big book, Mustang John, and he showed me in the big book about what the word recovered means, that we can recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. It doesn't mean I'm fixed. It doesn't mean I'm cured. It certainly doesn't mean I can drink safely. It's not something that I get because I do. It's because I'm experiencing that conscious contact with God, that daily reprieve contingent, the maintenance of my spiritual condition. That recovered is not a permanent state. It requires spiritual action. It requires selflessness. It requires prayer and meditation. It requires sponsorship. These are things that enable me to experience that reprieve that was afforded to me, that I've been able to experience for the last 10 plus years. And I'm grateful for that because I needed that so bad. I am the real alcoholic. I am right out of the big book. I don't memorize the big book to look good or win fun awards, but I need it. The book says this is a design for living that works, but it's a design for living. If I don't know what's in the book, how can I live this program that you guys are talking about? And I know that I need to live it to the willingness that I can muster. You see, my last drink, I ended up in a rehab, and I was talking to a therapist in rehab. And at this point, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop drinking. I wanted the pain to go away. I wasn't sure if I was an alcoholic. At this point, I had been diagnosed with borderline personality, clinical anxiety, and depression, a plethora of other stuff going on in my life, self-mutilating. Um, but I'm talking to this therapist who was sitting at a table, and he had me close my eyes. And he said, Chris, picture the person that you love more than anything. And I was thinking about my 1.5-year-old child that was home that I wanted to do. I wanted to be around him so bad. I remember getting a picture of him in a Mickey Mouse costume and I cried because I wanted to be with him for his Halloween, but I knew I couldn't because I couldn't be the dad that he deserved. But I remember picturing my son thinking about the person I love more than anything. And he said, Chris, close your eyes and picture your son, hear his voice, what he sounds like. He said, now picture your son drinking how you drink. Picture him feeling how you feel. Picture him thinking how you think. Picture him burning himself the way you burn yourself. The horror of picturing my son living the life that I was living was too much for me to take. And he said to me something so important that was so crucial. He said, what advice would you give your son if he was living the life you were living? I just remember saying I would tell him to do whatever it takes to get better. And he said, maybe that's what God has in store for you, to do whatever it takes. And at that time, I didn't know whatever it takes. But I'm grateful for the people that shared with me what it took. What the first, the big book we find out is the story about how the first 100 or so alcoholics recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, the book tells us precisely what they did. I needed to know what exactly they did because I need to know because everything I did hasn't worked. See, I'm an alcoholic the book talks about, the real moderate drinker, the hard drinker, and the real alcoholic. I am the real alcoholic. I know I'm a real alcoholic. The book talks about being when in the midst of progressive illness, we get worse, never better. And that was my experience with alcoholism. At one point, it was something I did for fun. At some point, there was no fun to be had. It was not a party. It was not an escape. It wasn't a coping mechanism. At times, I thought it was a coping mechanism. Like if you went through what I went through, you would drink how I drank. But that idea got squashed. Thank God for good sponsorship. I started to realize that I don't, I remember a guy saying, I drank on every day that ended in the letter Y, and I got that. I'm not a holiday drinker. I'm not a sad drinker. I'm just a drinker. I'm an alcoholic. I drank because that's what I do. And as I experienced this disease, the consequences got worse. The frequency of my drinking got worse. Got the DWEs, tons of blackouts. I was a regular person getting involved in fighting. I lost myself. I wasn't the son that my parents created, that they taught. My parents were good people. I wasn't around active alcoholism in my home. I wasn't around alcoholism in my home. A distant uncle and an aunt, but I wasn't exposed to it. My parents taught me good morals and values, and I wasn't living up to it. I thought I was partying, but it's a problem when your fraternity brothers are telling you that you have a drinking problem. Like I thought they were insane for thinking that, but as I did my step work, I started to really like consider my drinking. And the truth of the matter was is that there was no shutoff valve with me. I went to school with ideas as to how my life was going to work out. I was going to start a business. I was going to be a phys ed teacher. I was going to coach wrestling. I had plans. Um, and somewhere halfway through college, those plans completely went away. Drinking was my life. All of my primary goals became secondary and tertiary to picking up a drink. I modified my life to accommodate to my drinking, not the other way around. Non-alcoholics say, my drinking's out of hand. Let me slow it down. Let me drink on weekends, not on weekdays. I have work to do. I have things to do. You know, that was not me. The book talks about that the phenomenon of craving becomes paramount to all other interests. That was me. I had tons of reasons to stop drinking and I couldn't live up to them. I couldn't stop. And the first time I wanted to stop was having my first child. Remember holding her in my arms and then thinking like I'm going to be a good dad to you. But I knew drinking was getting in the way, and I attended a 30-day program. And other than the first day I stayed, so the first day I drank, they did a breathalyzer and I popped positive. And I told them I must have used mouthwash that morning. I was full of it. I was drinking all night into the morning. But I did achieve that 30 days in sobriety, and my parents came to congratulate me, and my dad, I never forget, pats me on my back and tells me I'm a strong little young man, and uh, and that he believes in me. And I swore to him I was not going to drink again. Talk about frothy emotional appeal. I swore to him I was not going to do that again, that I was really sorry. And he said, like, I understand, I know, I believe in you. What happened that night? I got drunk. Nothing bad happened, nothing good happened. I just did what I've always done. I'm a person that could stop drinking but cannot stop drinking. That was my experience. No matter how much I wanted to stop, I could not stop. And I continued ripping and roaring in an attempt to find that, because not only was my body physically deteriorating as a result of my drinking, and self-mutilating and all this other stuff, spiritually and emotionally, I was completely broken, chronic depression, panic attacks daily. Couldn't check my voicemails, couldn't send out invoices for a business that I once owned. I was an absolute disaster. And in an attempt to feel better, I I was blessed with a best friend who I've known since fourth grade. He was the guy that ended up bringing me to my last rehab and brought me to my first AA meeting. And he came to my home wake. He woke me up and he said, let's get up and we have things to do. And I'm like, leave me alone. And I owned a business at the time. And he said, Chris, if you don't get up, I'm going to hole punch every single paper in your office. And I'm just hung over, and I wanted him to leave me alone. And I nodded him off, and all of a sudden I hear click, 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 and he's hole punching every single piece of paper in my office. And I hear it. I'm so pissed off. And he comes in with this little piece of paper, and on this piece of paper was a few bits of information. Now, I'm adopted from the country of Colombia. I was born in Bogota, Colombia. I was given to a foster family for 3 months, and then my adopted parents picked me up at about 4 months old. And he found some information about my biological family on one of my dry erase boards. And he woke me up a few hours later. We were looking at the website of the adoption agency, both crying like sobbing children. And a few months later, I got a chance to meet my biological mom on Skype. And I'm talking to my mom like I'm talking to you guys. And I felt the joy and bliss that I would never have imagined. At this point, I had been going to therapy for since I was probably about middle school. Sixth grade is the earliest I remember attending therapy, and I knew that at that point, adoption was a big part of my emotional disturbance. And I got a chance to meet my mom. I wrestled in high school and college, and the first song I would listen to get ready before a match is a song called "Dance," and it was a song that a guy wrote for his mom that he wished he could have his last dance with his mom, and that's the song I would always listen to because I've been thinking about my mom since I was a kid, and I got a chance to meet her for the first time, to hear her voice, to hear "Call Me My Son," my love, my king, and I felt so blessed and amazing. And probably a week or two later, I hit the worst depression of my life. You see, I'm the type of guy that when you fix things on the outside, I hoped it would fix me on the inside. The book says, when the spiritual maladies overcome, I straighten out mentally and physically. I continued to try to fix the mental and physical, but it didn't affect the spiritual. It's like spending your life climbing a building, getting to the top of the building, and you realize you climbed the wrong building. After you do that enough, the juice starts to run away, the hope starts to go away. Recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I was completely hopeless. If this didn't fix me, what's going to? And I continued on my bender. I stopped talking to my biological family. I distanced myself from most of my other family. When they did reach out, it was with hesitation and reluctancy because as a result of a fourth and fifth step, I realized that my parents didn't distance themselves from me. They could because they didn't love me, but they couldn't stand to watch me hurt myself the way I was doing it. And imagine that feeling of helplessness, wanting to do anything to help their baby, their firstborn, their big son, who was killing himself in front of their eyes. And I continued on that path until that gift of desperation happened, that willingness to follow some directions. And I ended up almost getting into a car accident. And I went to my best friend Kevin's house, the guy I've known since fourth grade. And I told him, I think I may have a drinking problem. He's quote unquote, no shit, you have a drinking problem. I've been telling you, you've been having a drinking problem for years. And, him and my parents got me to a rehab, and I did fundamental step work, and we watched Who Moved My Cheese a few dozen times, which I didn't understand the premise about doing the same thing, expecting different results. I didn't get that. I never drank, thought it was a good idea. I knew it was a bad idea, but I didn't understand true powerlessness. Um, but I got sober. I was sober for a month and a half. But the problem with me, as sober for a month and a half, I'm the alcoholic that doesn't get better when you stop drinking. See, my problem is not just drinking. My problem is also not drinking. When I drink, the pain gets so bad that I have to stop. When I stop, the pain gets so bad that I have to go back to it again. The book talks about, in the doctor's opinion, restless, irritable, and discontent unless I can again implies that this person is sober, experience at ease and comfort that comes from taking a few drinks that other people take with impunity. The vision for you talks about the boy whistling in the dark, wishing for the end. He can't imagine his life with it or without it. He'll be at the jumping off point. That's me, guys. I don't have to remember the book. I know my experience. It's me. And a month and a half sober, I get shipped back from my little vacation in Florida, and I come back to real life and talk about the tornado roaring through the lives of many. I didn't know how to stay sober. I didn't know what to do. What I did know is I was told to go to AA and to get involved and get a sponsor. That's what I was told to do. And I went to meetings for a cry for help. And I met a guy out of Queens Village. And I asked him to sponsor me. The big book talks about finding a closed-mouthed person. I didn't know anything about him other than he was sober and he was smiling and he cared about me. That's all I knew about him. And uh, and I asked him to help me. And he knew one thing, how to help an alcoholic. You don't help him stay sober, you help him connect to power. And that's exactly what he did. That's the purpose of this program. Looking at the promises, but most of our steps have promises. A majority of our promises have nothing to do with drinking. When the spiritual maladies overcome my straight out mentally and physically, he guided me through the 12-step process to help me connect with a power greater than myself. And he made that abundantly clear that, sobriety and abstinence is a byproduct of this program, but it's one of the byproducts. It's 100% necessary. The doctor's opinion says the only way I can't experience this phenomenon of craving is complete abstinence. But he knew that he was going to guide me through the work, and I was willing to do whatever he told me because I was desperate. Truth is, by the time I met him, I was getting thirsty again. I was not feeling good and I needed help. And I remember asking him, and he closed his eyes, and I closed my eyes. I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know he was praying. But I closed my eyes and I just begged the God I didn't believe into that he was going to say yes, because if he didn't, my son once again was going to have a drunk dad. And he said yes, and he taught me about the disease of alcoholism. He used a big book to reference this and had me come to, the book says to concede to my innermost self that I am an alcoholic, that my life has become unmanageable. And he broke down the three portions of step one, involving the different nature of our disease, the physical allergy that causes the phenomenon of craving. When I drink, do I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol? When I drink, can I stop, stay stopped, or moderate? Do I choose alcohol or does alcohol choose me? Do I have this phenomenon of craving that becomes paramount to all other interests? Can any human power go relieve me of that alcoholism? No, I had no power, choice, or control, and I knew that. I didn't understand until that point what they talk about in the rooms about the first drink gets you drunk. Because when he was explaining to me about this physical allergy, he explained to me the reason why they say that is because the first drink stimulates the allergy, and the allergy causes the phenomenon of craving. I can't crave alcohol without picking up a drink. And he started to explain to me why, because I always thought in my mind, well, but it's never the first drink that gets you in trouble exteriorly. But he explained to me the problem isn't outside. The DWs and the blackouts and the fights that's just a byproduct of irresponsible drinking. The true alcoholic, the main thing we need to worry about is not what happens outside of me, but what happens inside of me. That when I drink that first drink, I can't stop after that. And then who knows what's going to happen. He explained to me about the book says the main problem centers in our mind rather than my body, which I found to be fascinating because I always understood. See, I'm a pretty strong-willed person. I'm a person that if you can't get through the door, go through the wall. Go hard or go home. I'm a college and high school wrestler or regional tennis. If you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to do it better than you've ever done it before, and I'm going to laugh in your face. I'm a very strong-willed monster of a human being, but when it came to drinking, I was useless. I could not get sober and stay sober. And he explained to me that we have this thing in the mind. The book talks about it being like alcoholic thinking. That sober, I'm going to pick up a drink. I'm going to experience that strange mental blank spot. I'm going to experience the thing that Fred and Jim and the Man of 30 experienced was that instead of me using my mind uses me. And that idea comes in abstinence where I think the idea comes, the thought comes that I think I could pick up a drink safely and that abstinence is not enough for a guy like me. And I knew that in my drinking because, as I said, I can get sober, I can't stay sober. And when I say I can get sober, I can't stay sober, we're not talking about months and years. We're talking about days, maybe a week or so at most. And then he explained to me about the spiritual malady. The book talks about being restless, irritable, and discontent. It discusses the bedevilments, prey to misery and depression, full of fear, unhappy, can't be of real help to others, can't control my emotional nature. I struggle with personal relationships. Did I feel like this when I was drinking? But did I also feel like this when I was abstinent? And that was me, that mass, looking at that list, every emotional diagnosis I was giving at psychotherapy, those were the descriptions. I realized for myself that this was not a neurological thing for me. It was a spiritual thing. This is alcoholism. I got diagnosed with borderline personality, and somehow the 12 steps started to alleviate some symptoms. That was my experience. He explained to me why I don't get better when I stop drinking. I have a threefold disease. And once I realize and I concede to my innermost self that I'm an alcoholic, the question is, am I willing to do what you did? And for years, I would always think about what would I tell my son to do? What would I tell my son to do? My son didn't get me sober, but he certainly inspired me. He certainly gave me the why until the why started to come from within. In the chapter Working with Others, it tells me that, that if I rely on people more than I rely upon God, I'm sure to drink again. He is not what keeps me sober, but at the beginning, he was certainly a motivational factor to get me, to remind me to keep going. And that second step, do I believe or am I willing to believe that that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity? I guess I didn't believe, but I did believe when I went to meetings because a good friend of mine says, you may not believe in Santa Claus, but you cannot deny the influence that the idea of Santa Claus has on people's actions and behaviors. If you don't believe in God, open your eyes and see how many people in Alcoholics Anonymous have the physical allergy, the phenomenon of craving, the mental obsession, the spiritual malady, a boatload of defects of character, resentments, anger, sex stuff, and yet they're sober for days, months, weeks, years, decades. How is that possible? Is it possible that something's doing it? There's a power connecting them that they're connected to that's enabling them to experience that daily reprieve. And if I don't believe in God, I can't deny the works of whatever this thing is. My sponsor had me do a list. He said, write down characteristics of God, what you in what you think God would be like if you're looking at him. And I wrote down a list of things. I'm like, do you want to see my homework assignment? He laughed. He's like, I could care less what's on the paper. He said, the fact is, if you weren't willing to believe, you wouldn't have wrote anything. Second step's done. It has nothing to do with picking anything, choosing anything, naming anything, no denominational stuff. It could be or could not be, but the discussion of it, do you believe or are you even willing to believe, doesn't require any conversation about anything specific that breaks our first tradition. I just had to be willing to believe in something. And for me, my second step was very similar to Bill Wilson, balking at the idea, but couldn't deny that there's an alcoholic in front of me that is sober and different than me. And that curiosity as to what caused that transformation got me through that second step. Became willing to continue with the third step, making that third step decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God as we understood him, as I then understood him. And for me, that third step for me is the book says the first requirement is any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. It brings me back to step one, reminding me that before we talk about the God thing, let me remind you at how brilliant of a job you do running your own life. And I know for a fact that I am a terrible person at running my own life. One of my other things that I'm terrible about is cars. I can't fix cars. I can't change tires in cars. I can screw up anything. I once put like transmission fluid in the engine, in the oil. When I was trying to change a tire, I put the thing under the wrong piece and I put a dent in the bottom of the car. I put a battery on backwards and smoke started coming from under the hood. I'm aware that I cannot do anything with cars. That's why I have a mechanic. But somehow, as it pertains to my alcoholism, my spiritual malady, I insist that I could run my own life. And that's what the third step helped me realize that I've been the director, I've been the actor running the show, trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery. I love page 60 to 63. It is such a beautiful, humbling reminder of every time I'm restless, irritable, and discontent, that's me on those pages. I'm resting satisfaction and happiness out of this world by managing well. I'm trying to control the people, places, and things around me to accommodate to me because I'm selfish, self-centered, self-absorbed. Because I'm thinking about me. I never suffer when I help somebody else. I always suffer when I'm thinking about me. It's like a prerequisite to suffering. If you want to suffer, Chris, think about you a little bit longer, you know? And that third step was an eye-opening step that it helped me realize that I was playing God. And what was the outcome? It didn't work. And this third step declaration, this covenant I'm going to make with God, God is going to be my spiritual power of attorney. He's going to be my director, my father, the principal of my life, the employer. I'm going to be a submissive agent. And how do I execute these things? By continuing with the steps. And for me, this is where the fourth and fifth step changed my life. Um, that was my experience. Doing a fifth step, I would have never been the same after a fifth step. I will never be the same. My sponsor guided me into putting together a sex inventory, a resentment inventory, and a fear inventory, and we met up promptly after. My sponsor did not take a long period of time, as yeah, I think I had about 6 months when I had my first sponsor, which was 4.5 months after I got out of rehab. And we got through it thoroughly and promptly. And we met to do a fifth step on it was a landfill in Merrick. And we get to this, we meet in a parking lot at the bottom of this landfill. We walk up a dirt path, and we see the Great South Bay on the left side, on the right side, on the south side. We get to the top of this mountain, you can see the New York City skyline, and we're standing up on this landfill, which is essentially a bunch of dirt with garbage underneath it. And we both like looked up at the water and the sun gleaming down, and he said, "Isn't this beautiful?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Look what God can do with garbage." And that was my fifth step experience of transformation. Something happened that day. Walking down that hill, a victim walked up. A victim did not walk down. He changed everything by changing nothing. He changed my perspective. He started off this fifth step with, tell me the resentments that you were planning on not telling me." Apparently, not only was my sponsor a good sponsor, but apparently he was also a prophet because I literally had a piece of paper in my back pocket, which was the things I was planning on not telling him. And fifth step gets a lot easier when you start off with the things that you're definitely not going to tell him. It got so much easier from that point on, and I'll share some of the highlights of it because they were profound. Because I was taught that, but take away my difficulties, that victory over them will bear witness to those that will help. Cling unto the thought that my dark past is the greatest asset that I have, the key of life and happiness for others. I know we share in a general way. That being said, it was some of the big stuff that has transformed me that I've been able to demonstrate God's omnipotence through. But one of the worst things on my resentment inventory had to do with being molested as a child. And we go through this list, and we go through the last column: what role or mistake did you play in it? Where are you being selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, afraid? And I was pretty pissed off at this question because I was a kid. And he looked at me and he said, "When someone compliments you, how long do you hold on to it? When someone hurts you, how long do you harbor it?" The book talks about, do we harbor resentments? I saw that. He said things like, "Well, did you ever use this experience to hurt some other people?" And I started to think about it, and I did. I did. I used this as an excuse for being polygamous and cheating and lying, and would say, if this didn't happen, I wouldn't have done X, Y, and Z. Then he talks about the big book. Though I didn't like his symptoms and the way it affected me, was he perhaps like me sick too? Was the person that did that spiritually sick? I don't know. I guess you'd have to be to do that. Well, we get to the amends process. This is a 12-step process, and we get to the amends process, and I had the opportunity. One of the first amends I made was to the person that molested me as a child. Why did I make amends? Because God told me to. It was a feeling in my gut. I can't explain it other than that. Something said that I had to find his number and call him. And I set up an appointment to meet the person that molested me in a parking lot. And I made amends to him for hating him, for blaming him on every wrongdoing I did to other people. And I asked, what could I do to make it up to him? And I'm grateful for good sponsorship. The book says, never am I going to bring up what they did. I'm going to walk on my side of the sidewalk. A tear ran down his cheek, and he said, "Do you remember what I did to you?" So I said nothing. I said, we can't talk about that. Because if we talk about that conversation, I'm going to drink again, and my son needs a sober dad. What can I do to make it up to you? And he asked me if we could talk. So we talked. He started to tell me a little bit about his childhood, and he started to tell me a story about how two people that should have loved him and protected him hurt him terribly. I was the first person that he told this to. It was a secret he's been living with for years. And I got the opportunity to hear some of the horrific things that happened to him as a kid. Did it cause why he did to me? I don't know. The book talks about, asking God to remove our resentments, about grant me the same patience, love, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. God save me from being angry. How can I be helpful? God gave me an opportunity through the worst resentment that I had to be helpful to a person that I once hated. And I started to experience something I've never felt before, and that's compassion, empathy. So, like the book says, we're willing to look at it from an entirely different angle. What he did was wrong. It was a terrible thing what he did, but he was very sick like me. And when I say like me, because right after the resentment inventory, I look at a sex inventory and I look at the people that I hurt because I was selfish, self-centered, self-absorbed, that I made decisions based on myself to hurt some other people. See, when I'm spiritually sick, I hurt a lot of people. I use my own manipulative schemes to get what I want in spite of what it does to them. Though I didn't do what he did, I've been driven by what he's been driven by. And when I look at these resentments that I had of people and I look at the sex inventory and the people that I've harmed in the sex inventory, that's not who I am as a person. But that's what I did when I'm spiritually sick and disconnected from God. Doesn't that also apply to those that I resent? That maybe the person that molested me, maybe that wasn't who he was as a person. Maybe that was just a representation of what was driving him. That he was just like me, very sick and very wrong. But that's not who he is as a person. Columns one and two, columns one, person, principle, institution. Column two is the cause, what they did. It separates the person from the cause. See, my resentments require for me to hate the person, to hate the principle, to hate the institution, but to not see the truth. The book says it's a fact-facing, fact-finding process and effort to discover the truth. The wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, has the power to kill. I started to realize that's not him. That's not him as a person. It's just he was very sick at the time, and I get it. With all the people that I've hurt, how do I have the audacity to be so judgmental towards all these people that I resented? Some of them were sick, some of them were wrong, some of them were fancied. The book talks about fancied or real. What fancied resentments? For years, I was talking to therapists about being abandoned as a child to find out in the fifth step that I was never abandoned, I was adopted. A little change of word, but a powerful truth. I learned as a result of a fifth step. The book says the wrongdoings of the fancy rare the power to kill. Cause, what happened in the second column? I wrote abandon. My sponsor says it's fact facing, fact finding. That's not a fact. Did she leave you in the middle of the jungle of Colombia? No. He's like, so did she abandon you? I'm like, no. He's like, well, what'd she do? He's like, she adopted me. He's like, good, right adoption. Mom adopted me, second column. About 3 years into my sobriety, I got a chance to meet the woman that never abandoned me, that adopted me. And I found out for 10 days. I'm grateful for people that talk about the rule is in the big book that if there's a reason for me to be there, that I'm going to be there. See, I was addicted to alcohol and cocaine, and here I was with 3 years sober, spending 10 years in the country of Colombia with my biological family that I met for the first time at 3 years sober. I didn't have my sponsor with me, but I had God with me. God is mobile. God goes everywhere I go. And at 3 years sober, I got a chance to spend time with my mommy. I was the best man at my brother's wedding, sober. I got a chance to comfort my younger brother, meet some amazing. I didn't know who the hell any of these people were because I don't speak Spanish. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I nothing was right, but everything was perfect. And that's a result of the fifth step. A lot of things started to come out of me that were toxic and poisonous. As a result of a fifth step, I felt the freedom that I've never felt before. It says we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know him better. My sponsor says, how do you know God better through this process? And I'm like, I don't know. He said, well, maybe you know God better because you know his kids better. Wow. I started to see things with some clarity that I never saw before. Started to have a different perspective. Good friend of mine says, look at your hands and tell me how many fingernails you see. Though you can't see any fingernails from this perspective, if you change the perspective, you could see something that's always been there. But you have to change the angle. The We Agnostics talks about you can't see the beauty of the forest because it's diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. Change your perspective. The fifth step, I experienced humility, and I experienced a change of perspective. I started to see things as they possibly, perhaps, really were. And as I said, the person that left down that mountain was a different person. I'll never be the same. 6 and 7, my program started getting lax. There were things I was keeping secrets about, defects of character. I was afraid to surrender. 8 and 9, let me tell you, I made some amazing amends, had some powerful experience. Obviously, the person that molested me. Um, my parents, my mom, I apologize to her from the bottom of my heart for all the things I did. She stopped me. She said, Chris, stop. She's like, the worst thing you did is she's like, you know how many nights I stayed up not knowing if you were going to be dead or alive? She's like, I just was afraid because I never know. You never talked to me. My job is to talk to my mom. I made amends to my mom. I made amends to my parents. As a result of the amends process, my dad calls me one day and he goes, Chris, I need your help. I was sober a few years at the time, and I'm like, what's that? He said, I have a friend dying of alcoholism, and the only person I think that I could ask to help her is you. The transformation that happens with relationships has been profound. I did amends to people that have passed away. It says when a person can't be seen, we write them an honest letter. I wrote some powerful amends to a child that was involved with an abortion, that was going to take care of his brother and sister. There was a guy, Alex, and I was in high school, and I was helping this kid with wrestling. And he was a young kid. He was a freshman, and he struggled. And I went to often I would spend time practices working with him, and I coached him through his first win. And he was a good kid. But all of a sudden, one of the assistant coaches started getting in the habit of calling him psycho, and I hated every time that he called this kid psycho. And one day he goes, Coach, why do you call me psycho? He's like, I don't know. You look like a kid that would shoot up a school. And I was pissed. I was angry, but I didn't have the courage to say something. Well, one day we show up at wrestling practice and everybody was sitting around the perimeter of the room. We never sit, we're always running. When you walk in, it's time to run. And the coach comes in and he says that Alex committed suicide. And for years, I wish I could have done something. He was a good kid. I didn't stand up for him. And in this letter, I wrote this letter saying that if someone's getting picked on, I'm going to be right there to stand up for the person. Alex isn't dead. His spirit is within me. He's changing me. I get to celebrate his presence by my new way of life to stand up for those that can't stand up for themselves. And I've had the opportunity to relive that and to give back, to amend former behaviors. I was cowardly. And today I get to have courage, men of faith of courage. We trust our God. We let God demonstrate to us what he will do. I had a fun story, and I was working in downtown Manhattan, and I see this guy, and every lunch break I would take a walk down to the water, and I'd walk for an hour, and I saw this guy harassing these two girls. And just Alex came to my mind, and I jumped, I ran right in there, and I was like, I said, girls, is he harassing you? And they're like, please, can you get him to stop? So I will go to get in his face, and he said something, he curses at me, but he smells of alcohol, and it's like 11:30 in the morning. So I started to talk to him about God and Alcoholics Anonymous and how this program saved my life. He stopped harassing the girls and he ran away from me. He was, more afraid of talking about sobriety than he was, in having a physical altercation with me. But God shows me how to handle things differently. Freaking amazing. I paid off money that I didn't. And my biggest lesson in the ninth step was like for the ones that they're tough. I'm sharing all this stuff, and I could spend all day talking about what this program has done for me, but the amends process was not easy. I spent an hour praying to God to give me the courage to walk into an accountant's office to start paying off the money that I owed her. It is tough. And the biggest thing that I learned from the amends process is when you're struggling, not if, but when, to talk to someone. See, I suffered silently with steps 6 and 7 and steps 8 and 9. I wasn't always very honest and transparent and candid about where I was struggling. And everything I didn't do that this book tells me to do brought more pain to me and the people around me. That was my experience. But it's been absolutely transformative going through the amends process. More recently, I realized I had this like epiphany when in college I got arrested for a DWAI, and my parents paid for this attorney. The attorney would I remember as the attorney kept going to the judge and he kept saying, "Your Honor, the emphasis is on the wrong syllable." And he would say it over and over and over again. Like, how much did they pay this guy? What is he talking about? The emphasis is on the wrong syllable. So I asked my dad, I'm like, we're on the way back from court. We're upstate New York, and we're on our way back to Long Island. My dad, what was he meaning by the emphasis on the wrong syllable? And he giggled and he said the attorney kept saying the emphasis is on the wrong syllable, which means the emphasis is on the wrong syllable. You're focusing on the wrong thing. And man, that means something different to me today. This book tells me make sure your real reliance is always upon him, which is a great, lead into steps 10 through 12. This process is a removal process. What's the problem? What's the solution? Go through this ego deflation process. As a price must be paid, destruction of self-centeredness, going through steps 4 through 9. A lot of stuff gets removed from me. 10, 11, 12 was taught, if you have old coffee, pour it out and make room for some new coffee. You can't put the new coffee on top of the old coffee. A lot of stuff got removed in steps 4 through 9, as you can tell. 10, 11, 12 were where the emphasis is no longer on the wrong syllable. That this program is about nothing other than growing in a relationship with God, to continue to remove the things that are blocking me off from the sunlight of spirit and grow closer to God. And I could tell you, steps 10 and 11, my first 3 years in sobriety, I suffered because I was doing my interpretation of steps 10 and 11, not what it actually says in the book. I was doing what it says in the shade, not what it says in the book. You know, and the forward to the third edition talk says something like that the program is a description of the steps, or the steps are a description of the program, a description. So when I look at the steps in the shade, it's not the program, it's a description of the program. 5 minutes, thank you, Larry. That the program is within the pages, within the book, page 84 to 88, very specific directions. And with 3 years sober, I joined a group called the 164 group, and I had this sponsee, and we're trying to find him a home group. It was near where I worked, not where I lived, and we're trying to find him a home group. And I see, 164. Oh, that's creative. That's like the first 164 pages. Let's try that group. So we go there, and they're a bunch of big book thumpers, and we started going there on a regular basis. And my sponsee got a service commitment. But the problem with that group is that they were telling me things I didn't want to hear. Like make direct amends to all those I had harmed, all. And they would just emphasize, and then they would talk about steps and about what they were doing with step 10 and 11 and what the book says and what they were doing to practice those steps. And the truth was I wasn't doing them. I was praying every so often. I was meditating even less often, and I'm suffering in sobriety. About 3 years sober, you should have saw me. I was a disaster. And the sponsee relapsed, but he had a service commitment. Well, guess who had to take his service commitment? I took his service commitment, and that became my home group for a few years. And I dove into the big book with all of the desperation of a drowning man because there was stuff that I was missing. I was suffering of untreated alcoholism. And I dove in and I saw the directions and I started implementing directions and I started to experiencing the promises that I was not experiencing at that point. I have gone through ups and downs in sobriety. Years 3 was awful. Years 2 and 3 were really difficult. Year 5 and 6, year 6 was tough. And every time I suffer in sobriety, it's normally because it's something I'm not doing. It's an amends that I didn't make. It's a defect of character I'm not surrendering, or at least being willing to. It's something I was lying about. Man, my first sponsor would always say, wise people learn from their mistakes. Really wise people learn from other people's mistakes. If you're new here, learn from my mistakes. You don't have to learn what we've already learned. The book we were talking about, 50% got sober at once, 25% got sober after a few relapses, the other showed improvement if they were willing. We know what's worked. They share what works. Do what it says. Get in the big book. Because when I do what the book tells me, I tend to experience what the book promises me. I get to experience that peace and ease. I don't have to fight anything or anyone. I'm no longer a victim. I'm no longer worshiping false idols and experiencing loss of a fake higher power. The book talks about make sure your real reliance is always upon Him. Is it possible there are fake reliances? And we agnostic says I'm a worshiper of money, sentiment, things, people. There's a lot of false idols that I fall trap to in sobriety, and I needed to be around in this last 10 years of sobriety some really good people, some people that knew the program, not to know it, not to be better or anything, but to share. They say the more you have, you can't give away, unless you have it, but you also don't get it until you give it away. What I learned in my experience is that the more I have, the more I get to give away. And I started to study more and read more and learn more and YouTube links. And every day I was listening to a new big book study on YouTube, and I started to really heal. And that's where I'm at today. I sponsor a lot of people. I'm very alcoholic, so I'm going to sponsor a lot of people. The book talks about strenuous work, one alcoholic to another. It's vital to permanent recovery. Nothing more ensures immunity over alcohol than intensive work with other alcoholics. I don't know what's intensive, what's not, what's, strenuous or what's not, but I don't want to find out. My son asked me one day, because he hears me on Zoom and stuff, and he said, you an alcoholic? He's 11 now. He'll be 12 in April. I got sober when he was 1.5. And he said, are you an alcoholic? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, it just means I can't drink safely like other people. And he says, well, what would happen if you drank? And I started crying again because I don't know what type of monster I would turn into. I still don't have power, choice, control over alcohol. What I do have power, choice, and control over is what I'm going to do. Faith without works is dead. I choose to work today. I choose to dive in. I choose to be honest and be candid about things that I wouldn't want to talk about. As a result of this program, I've been able to stay sober. I've been able to see miracles happen. I sponsor a lot of people, and I see every week something miraculous. Someone wake up doing a 4 step, and their eyes open up, and they see things from, man, how could I want to drink when I see that type of bliss and joy? As I said, I have a relationship with my biological family today. I have a relationship with my parents today. Right before Christmas, my son was in a Christmas concert. See, when I got sober, he was 1.5, and a little bit after that, he was probably 4 years old or so. And I'd bring him to this preschool type of, it was like pre-preschool. He had some OT stuff going on, and we would put on music, and he would sing songs. And like some of my best times were at night, and when I was bringing him to school, because we would pray, we'd meditate, and we'd sing a song together. I'm a terrible singer, but he sung like an angel. And like right before Christmas, he had a concert, and he plays the viola, which is another funny story in of itself. And he sings. He joined a choir this year, and he had one of the solos, and I cried for days. I cried for days. I get the chance to embrace my kids. That in spite of difficult times, I've been given a purpose, and that's to help someone. That's to love people. The book says our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about me. My kids don't have to see me drunk. All I have to do is focus on loving, practice these spiritual disciplines, help other alcoholics, pray and meditate, regular inventories, dive deeper and deeper and deeper. When I'm struggling, and I've experienced a lot of struggles in sobriety, the book says pain is a touchstone of spiritual growth. Long version of the serenity prayer, accepting hardships is the pathway to peace. If I want to grow in understanding and effectiveness, I'm going to have to struggle. That pain is a part of the struggle. It grows me closer to God. Some people say God won't give you anything more than you can handle. I think life will give me more than I can handle. That's why I need God in the first place. There are opportunities for growth. There's stages, not final destinations. That's where I'm at today. I'm sober. I'm blessed. I'm not always happy. I read myself 60, 63, but I'm purposeful. And I owe Alcoholics Anonymous and a power greater than myself, God, and everything that I have. Thanks for letting me share, guys.